This is NJN, the New Jersey Channel. WNJM, transmitting from Montclair State.
Miguel Perez's column appears every Wednesday and Friday in The Record, North Jersey's daily intelligence report. The Record, proud supporter of NJN.
Next on Images Imágenes, racism in the Hispanic community. Saludos, welcome to Images Imágenes. I'm Miguel Perez. It's a taboo subject among Latinos. We know it's there, a real problem affecting our community, but most Latinos don't want to talk about it, and some refuse to recognize it exists. In Spanish, we call it racismo. It doesn't need a translation, you know what I mean. In the news media, you see reports about racial tensions between blacks and Latinos in Miami, New York, Chicago, and other urban centers where minorities are forced to compete for a very small piece of the American pie. We see that divisiveness developing in Newark, where there's a battle for one city council seat. Among minority activists, you hear all this talk about how African Americans and Latinos must form political coalitions to get a bigger piece of that pie and avoid the tensions. But how can Latinos avoid having differences with African Americans when they often are unable to reconcile the racial differences and ease the tensions among themselves? Racism among Latinos, that's the subject we'll be debating here today with Angelo Falcon, president and founder of the Institute for Puerto Rican Policy in New York, Vivian Lansot, coordinator of the Latino Scholars Program at Rutgers University in Newark, and Jorge Reina Chement, associate professor at the School of Communications at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here. This is a very sensitive subject, a very sensitive issue in the Hispanic community, and I'd like to have a discussion, an open discussion with the three of you about many issues affecting racism within the Latino community. First of all, the identity problem. It causes an identity problem for many Latinos, where you see some Latinos who are clearly black say, no, don't call me black, I'm a Latino. And then you have other Latinos who accuse you of being a white who wants to be black. So it works both ways. And I want to just find out what you feel about that whole situation of the identity crisis that it creates in the Hispanic community. Vivian, let's start with you. Ladies first.
Oh, okay, thank you. It sure is a sensitive issue. One of the things that you mentioned was the light-skinned wannabe black. And growing up in Newark, that was one of the problems that I had, because my neighbors happened to be African American, and we grow up, it was never it was never looked upon as they're black and they're Puerto Rican. It was just, we were always together, and it was something growing up that we never looked at. So now, as an adult, while I was in college, it was one of the things where there was so much divisiveness, and I didn't see it until I got to college. So when I went and joined the Black Organization of Students, it was an issue where the Puerto Ricans were saying, is she black, is she Puerto Rican, what is she? The fact that my last name is not Puerto Rican, you know, it's like, oh, she wants to be black. And so when I joined the Puerto Rican organization and I was an officer, it was, is she? You know, and when we had to associate ourselves, oh, send Vivian, you know, because she can relate well. And I think one of the things that we need to do is acknowledge the internal racism within our own community, because we have a rainbow of people. You know, my grandmother might be very light-skinned, but with African features. And the fact that we have to understand that a lot of the things that our ancestors went through, they went through the same thing, but in a different language.
Angelo?
Well, I think the difficulty of the issue is that many times, you know, Latinos come from Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, Latin America with a different concept of race, one that is really not tied to kind of a genetic notion like you have in this country, like kind of what they call the one-drop rule, that you're either black or you're white in this country. Sure. And so many Latinos come into a kind of this kind of racial bipolar kind of concept and have trouble dealing with it. And many times, as you mentioned at the outset, when there's an issue of competition between various communities, you wind up having people being more concerned about being, you know, or defining themselves as Latino than looking at internal divisions within the community. And that goes not just racially, but also in terms of national origin, because, you know, of course, in the Latino community, there are Puerto Ricans, there are Cubans, there are Dominicans. And so what happens is that we have all these kind of internal divisions, and the challenge has always been, how do you understand the dynamic in a way that allows people to work together and allows connections with other communities so you could develop political coalitions. And what you have is a situation that's a very unstable one, that's always changing, and that's a very difficult one.
But even among those national groups, the different nationalities that represent the Latino community, you have a variety of races. And that's the problem, that sometimes we don't know how to define one from the other. Latinos come in all colors. We represent the whole rainbow, Jorge.
Well, we are actually a community of many faces. Unfortunately, we only get one face in the media. The media wants to see us as people who all speak Spanish, who all come from somewhere south of the border, so to speak, and who share a kind of vague, non-Northern European look. But in fact, when we come within our communities, I would say not single community, we know that we're Mexicans, and we're Santo Domingans, and we're Cubans, and we're Puerto Ricans, and we're Central Americans, and we bring all of those different cultures, all of those both good and bad characteristics, and arriving in the United States, they don't always come out harmoniously.
Mm-hmm. But when we talk about racism, discrimination based on race in the Hispanic community, is it based on hatred for another group based on the color of his skin, or is it a lack of understanding of our own roots? Our own, the mestizo and the mulatto and the black and the white.
There's a term. I mean, racism is a worldwide system, and I think there's a term, the prejudice of no prejudice. I remember Samuel Betances used to write about in terms of Puerto Rico. That is that there's kind of denial, but then when you look at many of our societies, you do see a racial hierarchy. No matter how we develop kind of all these intermediate colorations between black and white, we have, you know, all sorts of names that we come up, trigueño and all this kind of stuff. But you find the process where many times, for example, in Puerto Rico, many of the political leadership, for the most part, is white. People who had prestigious institutions are white, to the point where, you know, you had a movement a few years ago of black Puerto Ricans trying to get some representation in the island's government. So those tensions are there, and there is racism like you have in this country, but it's a little muted in terms of the way we look at it. It's not as rigid historically as it's been here. And a lot of this, you know, has to do also with the composition. For example, in Puerto Rico, there were less slaves, a much smaller slave population historically than there was in Cuba. So you have a stronger kind of African kind of presence in Cuba. You have, you know, the class dimensions of this. For example, right now, you know, a friend of mine who just came back from Cuba tells me that one of the things that people are concerned about is they don't want all the blanquitos, los cubanos blanquitos, to come back to Cuba no matter what happens to Castro. Mm-hmm. So you have these kinds of racial.
Except that Castro is white too.
Yeah, but again, there's that class dimension also to it, because, you know, we did a study of Latino National Political Survey. It was a national study of Latino political attitudes. And for example, we looked at Puerto Ricans. We did two things with the group. We had the interviewers. We had the people say what race they thought, whether they were black, white, or something else. And then we had the interviewers give them a rating in terms of their skin color. And for example, among the Puerto Ricans who were rated as being, by the interviewers, as being very dark-skinned, a third said they were white, a third said they were black, and a third said they were something else, Latino, something else. So it's in terms of how people racially identify in our communities, it's not that clear. It's not even as tied to skin color as you would think.
In reference to what you said about Cuba, I think it's very significant that while they say that, and it's true, they do say that about Cubans in the United States returning, and some say that, but it's a question of perception, because if you look at the fact that the Castro government, the hierarchy of the Castro government, is mostly white. So how can they be afraid of the white Cubans coming back when the government they have in power right now is already mostly white. And that's the question that we want to debate here today, the question of the perception of the Hispanic community. And I think perhaps the media, especially the Hispanic media, contributes to that too. You don't see too many black faces on Univision and Telemundo, do you?
But you see them when they're housed, the servants, and on the novelas, and which is really amazing because in 1993 you're still seeing that. 1994, you know, you're seeing stuff like that. I did it when I was teaching a summer program. One of the things that I did was I came in and I was tired of my students calling each other names because how do you translate trigueño, Prieto, Moreno into English? It all identifies to something that refers to black. And one of the things that I did was I came in and I told my students, I want all my black students here, I want all my white students here, and I want all my others here. I had a classroom that was divided into whites and others. And then I had a role of student in the classroom that was not, that had no students there. And one of the things that when I asked was, well, I'm not black and I'm not white, I'm Puerto Rican. So then when you started asking them, they really didn't know who they were and didn't know what was the makeup of being a Puerto Rican. So when you get into a history, I think it's lack of knowledge also that we don't know our ancestry. My black students didn't want to identify with being black because it was identifying with being African American. And so one of the things that they said was things that they hear on television. Television portrays, when there's something wrong, they identify you as a black male being sought for, you know, Hispanic male being sought for. And so they tend to have perceptions that way. And one of the things that we need to do is break away from that and saying, well, you know, I said to them, well, are you telling me that there are no Hispanic or Puerto Rican males that rob or, you know, so we broke it down into that. And then they started thinking and said, wow, you know, I never thought about that Ramon down the street might be robbing, you know, the lady, you know, and they didn't see it that way. But what they're being told is that don't identify with that group of people because that group of people is this. And so they internalize that. And so we tend to associate negative things with the fact that it may be black. And
¿Y tu abuela dónde está? That's a phrase that we use in Spanish to say, and your grandmother, where has she been? In other words, you don't really know whether you have African roots if you're Hispanic, unless you really, really did research on your own family tree.
But that's also the tradition of whitening. It's possible in many Latin American societies to, through marrying a white or through having money that you can whiten yourself. And sometimes that creates a situation where you're trying to pass and you're leaving your family behind, and your mother may be a little darker and you don't visit her. I mean, we have a lot of stories, you know, in terms of Latino communities of nice little tragic stories about that.
Well, I've heard people make that. I've heard that dark or black Latinos say that they want to marry somebody of lighter skin because they want to improve the race.
Right, and politically,
that kinky hair is pelo malo, bad hair instead of white
politically,
hair.
Well, the other thing that I've seen, which is always, you know, I found hilarious, is you see, let's say, a Puerto Rican, very, very dark skin, very dark skin, talking about eso negro, those are blacks, talking about African Americans, trying to screw the Latino community or the Puerto Rican community, and the person himself is black. So it's a very complex thing. I think one of the things that the Latino experience does, I think it challenges, in fact, the way people look at race in this country, and it becomes particularly important today because what's happening in most American cities is that they're becoming largely black and Latino and Asian. And so what's happening is that the African American community sometimes gets very defensive as well because in terms of population growth, in many places the African American community has stabilized in size, and the growth that you're seeing is among Latinos, among Asians, among West Indians. I mean, even within the black community, you have differences in the way you relate racially as well. You have West Indians, African Americans, and sometimes you see tensions there as well.
And what's ironic about all this, I've read articles in which people argue that the African American or the African Hispanic or the African Latino is basically closer to Africa than even the African American is because of our music, because of our traditions, because even of our own Santeria, the religion that some practice. So that, you know, it's strange that we are still a lot closer to Africa, but some of us tend to deny those roots or don't understand them too well.
I think it's just a matter of not understanding, because when you talk about traditions, some of the things that we have, el vasito al lado de la puerta,
right,
you know, bread over your door, those are things that came from Africa. And even if you look at the way we dress, our loud colors come from being people of the sun. So, you know, when people tend to look at that, and that's one of the things I try to make my students understand, that, you know, when we talk about Africa, or even when people say to me, why do you attend affairs for African Americans, or why do you relate to African Americans? One of the things I say is because we have more similarities than we have differences. The only thing is that we have a different language. And if we start looking at our roots, we will see that. I think that we need to start getting away from this divisiveness and start building those coalitions that we talk about, even amongst ourselves. You know, so, I mean, my father is a man of color. My mother is a woman with Indian features, and I'm a very light-skinned woman. So where does that leave me? Where do I say, well, my father's black? You know, if we're going to identify or that in terms of society. But I think society puts us in a position where they put a whole bunch of crumbs, and then they put the Latinos here and African Americans here, and they say, well, here, there are the crumbs, and you fight for them. And rather than us putting them crumbs together and building a cookie and splitting it, we can't do that.
Well, it seems, Jorge, like in this country we're either one or the other. In Latin America, we have many more racial categories, if you will, than we have here.
I have two first lessons for anybody who's interested in this. And the first is that what anybody knows about racism regarding blacks and whites in the United States is not a good introduction to understanding Latinos. And the second is what's been coming out here. The Latino story is very complex. And the issue of racism within our community is full of subtleties that even someone who's Mexican like myself and who visits Puerto Rico doesn't understand racism as it exists in Puerto Rico just because I might understand racism as it exists in Mexico. The one thing that is the same across all of our Latino cultures is that we, in a sense, emerge out of a colonial history. Spaniards arrived, and the Spaniards brought with them a system to create inequalities because that was the only way they could control all the people who were here. And that system for inequalities turned out to reflect skin color in some ways. And it has survived in some form right down to the very present. And most of us learn, if not to accept it, we learn about it as children. We learn about it as children by having people pointed out on the street and told to us who they are and given names. And depending on where you are in the various Latino cultures, those names can be long and complicated, have lots of different names, very subtle. But what they boil down to is a system of inequality that we all, in some way or other, contribute to maintaining, even when we don't want to.
No, but I think the other thing is that you had mentioned something, I think that was made a lot of, is a dominant reality, at least here in the Northeast in particular, and that is that, you know, blacks and Puerto Ricans, for example, grow up side by side in same communities. And one of the things that you find that's real interesting culturally is that a lot of a cultural innovation in terms of popular culture over the last decade or so has generated from those very inner cities and those mixes, whether you talk about rap music or you talk about hip-hop or breakdancing or whatever. A lot of that came out of a fusion, not from a purely African-American perspective, but, you know, this is something you saw percolating in the South Bronx between blacks and Puerto Ricans, so that there you have actually a blending together. And I think it's usually in later years when you really start seeing those divisions where people start talking about pies and splitting up pies and politics, but that as you're growing up, you find that in our communities, you know, you don't have those kinds of divisions. There is a commonality, a common culture. I talked to many African Americans today who lament the fact that, unlike many years ago, they don't participate in Latino activities in terms of Latin dances and that kind of thing as much as they used to. This is the older generation. So that there is much more mixing than and much more unity there of experience, and much more, as I said, cultural innovation out of that experience that has become popularized and commoditized, or whatever you want to call it. And it's there, but yet when we become adults and we become politicians, the dynamic becomes very different.
But then you also have African Americans who tell you they don't understand how there can be discrimination among Latinos, being that many of us are of African roots, being as though that we do have that background, being as though that we practice some things that are even more African than they do. And so you know, there's a lack of understanding on behalf of many African Americans. And I just tell them, look, hey, look, we also have our own Archie Bunkers. And I've written several columns about Latino prejudices. And I call them the Pedro Acomplejados, because again, we do have our own people with a heavy-duty complex about dealing with the different races. But then again, let's take this a step further. It's not just race that we discriminate on. we touched on it earlier briefly, there is a lot of discrimination because of nationality, because of the different backgrounds that we have, because we are sometimes competing with other Latino groups for entitlements or for job opportunities or for business opportunities or for housing or for many different issues. We are competing. You know, you hear the one Latino saying, well, this other group is coming in and they're taking over all the bodegas. Or they're taking over El Barrio, and I don't know where I'm going to go live because El Barrio is not of my nationality anymore, now it belongs. And what they're doing is basically expressing the same thing that bigots used to express about them a few years earlier. And they don't see this.
Well, that's interesting because that's like a kind of division or kind of racism or whatever of the powerless, between powerless peoples. You know, Puerto Rico is a good example, for example, where right now, you know, one of the things that's interesting is that there's a lot of scapegoating going on in Puerto Rico against Dominicans. So those Dominicans are coming in. There was a time when it was Cubans in Puerto Rico. There was a time when it was something called New Yorkers, that is Puerto Ricans from here, who were bringing back crime to Puerto Rico, and we were bringing back this evil thing called salsa, this low-class, you know, music, and destroying the culture of Puerto Rico. It's a process that you see of again, scapegoating different groups, and where the reality is we're not immune to it in our communities, and we certainly see that process where what's happening and what complicates it is that the whole kind of racial or ethnic group secession process has gotten very complex. It's not like the old days where you would have the kind of the Jewish model where you had a very poor community. They'd start taking over the institutions in their neighborhoods. They'd run the stores. Their kids would move out. They would, you know, be there, Jews in black neighborhoods running all the stores. And you had a kind of like a process going on that it was assumed all groups would go through. In the Puerto Rican case, for example, we 10 to 15 years ago owned probably most of the bodegas, most of the grocery stores. And we're seeing over the last 10, 15 years a tremendous change in terms of ownership of those kind of very visible institutions or businesses.
But it doesn't mean somebody actually came in and took over the bodega. The original owner sold it because maybe he moved on to bigger and better things.
Or maybe because also there were maybe a lot of dead ends. In other words, the model wasn't working of upward mobility, and people in fact found the bodegas to be dead-end businesses. I mean, I'm the son of a bodeguero, and to me, many times those were very dead-end businesses. So when I hear people saying, the Dominicans took over the bodega in the corner, I say, ay bendito, poor guy's now he's got to do this and take over that business. But you do see that. But the other thing that's interesting is the whole movement, for example, of Dominicans taking over and owning supermarkets. There's a new development as well. But those things create those kinds of tensions, and that's something that we need to work out as a problem. In other words, naturally, because we're all Latinos, doesn't mean we're all just going to be working together. And that's another problem that our political, business leadership, our religious leadership has to work on, and it's not something that comes automatically.
But again, isn't it a problem where what you have is a situation where it's a reoccurring chapter of American history where we forget the message in the Statue of Liberty, and we've been here a few years now, we're settled in, let's discriminate against the latest group of arrival. They're coming in, their own welfare, they're taking our jobs. We forget that our own ancestors did the same thing?
Well, if we don't forget it, we act it out. The new model may be more complicated, and I'm willing to, I think there's good evidence to support that the new model is very much more complicated, but it carries the elements of the old model in the sense that moving up the ladder in the United States traditionally has encouraged one to stand on the person who's below one on the ladder, and that can occur within a complex heterogeneous community like ours, as well as through the process of assimilation. You're talking about people losing touch with their communities as they assimilate. Part of the process of assimilation encourages you to do that. And so a person has to take extra effort to maintain an identity that others around them are encouraging them to lose.
Vivian, you were going to say?
But I mean, in responding to that, what do we do? For instance, someone like myself who grew up in a community that was predominantly African American, do I just lose who I am, Puerto Riqueña, and assimilate into a culture that is not necessarily my own, but I don't discriminate against it? I've accepted that and accepted the fact that there were more similarities. I mean, we are living in a society that teaches us to oppress even though we are oppressed.
So someone like you runs the risk of being discriminated by both groups.
Exactly. So, you know, if you, oh, esa quiere ser negra, and then in an African-American perspective, it's like, oh, she's light-skinned. So it isn't, because now in this whole Afrocentric growth that we're in, do we say, well, you know, I mean, I do have this African heritage, so where do I fit in there? You know, so, I mean, it's a discrimination from both groups, so absolutely, you know, where do you fit in?
Angelo, you have the results. We have very little time, but give us a briefing of what you found in this survey that was conducted regarding the attitudes of Latinos toward each other.
Oh, yeah, there was interesting that one of the television stations had sponsored a survey where they looked at Latino intergroup relations, and there were some interesting things. I mean, when asked, do all Latinos pull together, does each Latino group look out for its own, when they looked at Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Colombians, and Cubans in the New York metropolitan area, large majorities said they look out for their own. And I thought that was interesting, feeling, again, that commonality isn't there. There were even a question about which Latino group do you think is most prejudiced against other Latinos, and here it was different. Puerto Ricans thought Dominicans were the most prejudiced, Dominicans thought that Cubans were the most prejudiced, Colombians thought that also Cubans were the most prejudiced, and the Cubans felt that that Dominicans were the most prejudiced. So you have, again, a very strange kind of process of people looking at, within the community, looking at the various groups and us seeing that this can be if we don't deal with it, if our leaderships don't deal with this in an effective way, it could be something that could be in our undoing, because we're talking about the large numbers of Latinos, the growing Latino population, how that's going to translate into votes and political power. But unless we find ways of working together, those numbers aren't going to mean anything.
Well, with that, we're going to have to close. Thank you for being on the program. This is just the first of many programs we intend to do in the future regarding this issue, and perhaps the next time we can come back with some solutions as to what it is that blacks and Latinos and other ethnic groups can do to work together to create this society that we all want to see in this country. Again, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your thoughts. And I'm Miguel Perez, here for Images Imágenes, and I'll see you next week on another edition of this program devoted to the images, those beautiful imágenes of the Latino community. Hasta pronto.
Miguel Perez's column appears every Wednesday and Friday in The Record, North Jersey's daily intelligence report. The Record, proud supporter of NJN.